let's jump right in, folks. Today we're diving into something pretty intense. We're looking at the global impact of Trump's second inauguration. It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure.
It really is. And what we have is, well, a really unique perspective. A blog post called Reflections on the Eve of Change by Guy Simplicius.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading that.
And he wrote it, get this, on January 20th, 2025. Literally the day before.
Wow, talk about being right there in the moment.
Right, like the eve of this huge event, like holding your breath. And he keeps saying over and over how this wasn't just another inauguration.
No, definitely not. It felt like the whole world was kind of bracing itself for a whole new era to start.
Yeah, exactly. A new global era, like he says. And he has some big questions in this post.
He really does.
Like, what's going to happen to the global power dynamics? Is China really going to become the big player?
Yeah, and what about the alliances? Are they all going to get totally reshuffled?
And then, this is a big one, how is technology, social media and all that,
Yeah.
how is that playing into all this change?
Oh, and speaking of change, those Time magazine covers. I mean, what a contrast. 2017, Trump's looking kind of withdrawn, almost ominous,
Yeah, like a storm brewing inside his office, right?
Exactly. But then 2025, he's front and center. Like he's sweeping away all of Biden's policies with the storm raging outside.
Huh. So symbolic. But it really makes you think, is this a real change or just clever media stuff?
Yeah. I mean, we all know the media can spin things.
Oh, absolutely. The way they show things can really change how people see things. Yeah.
Definitely. And then there's that whole thing with Trump's day one executive orders.
Oh, yeah. Simplicius lays them out.
And they're bold. I mean, deportation raids right off the bat.
National emergency at the border. Pardons for the January 6th stuff.
And the whole deep state purge.
Wow. It's like he was like he wanted to completely undo everything Biden did. Reversing those diversity rules, even rolling back the offshore drilling limits.
It's definitely a sign that he wanted to, make a splash right away.
Sure. No kidding. I mean, make an impact for sure. But you have to wonder about, the ripple effects. How will these actions, will they play into all the other things going on socially, politically? It's a big question.
Big, big question. Now, this is where things get interesting. Simplicius talks about, there was this guy, Alex Craner. He was on a Zoom call with Steve Bannon.
Oh, yeah, Bannon.
And Bannon basically says that Trump's team, they're going straight for the jugular. He says, and I quote, "The days of thunder begin on Monday, and the world will not be the same again."
Whoa. Bannon, always the dramatic one.
Right. But the thing is, it's who he says Trump is targeting. They.
They. Yeah, not a country, not a rival, just they.
Exactly. So mysterious. Right. Makes you think, who is this they?
Adds to that feeling that something big is coming, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Like the whole world's about to get turned upside down. Simplicius even mentions how Trump managed to dodge all those attempts to derail his inauguration.
Yeah, almost like he was just walking through this minefield, no problem.
Makes you wonder if the balance of power, if it had already shifted, or if Trump just got lucky.
Hard to say for sure. Yeah. But it definitely fits into the story Simplicius is telling. And then he throws in this idea, this escape velocity.
Yeah, the world waking up to a secret history of the world order.
He even brings up Kissinger's Memorandum 200.
Which, for those who don't know, that was a top secret document. Back in the 70s, it was about population control.
In developing countries?
Yeah, the U.S. government's strategy.
Basically, he's saying that there's these hidden things going on, agendas that we don't know about, this whole, hidden power structure. Makes you wonder if everything we think we know is, wrong.
It's a lot to take in, and it all connects to this idea of China's rise. Simplicius even quotes Marco Rubio. He's been pretty outspoken about China.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And he straight up accuses China of lying, cheating, and stealing their way to power. I mean, that's a pretty serious accusation.
Yeah, it is. But it's important to, think about where this is coming from. Why is he saying this? Is it genuine? Is it political? People need to, be able to think for themselves when it comes to politics, especially.
That's true. And Rubio doesn't stop there. He goes on to say that China will be ruling the globe within 10 years.
Wow, that's quite a prediction.
It is. But I think it shows how worried people are about China's influence. Economically, politically.
In the West, especially. It's like they see it as a zero-sum game. If China wins, the West loses.
Speaking of, double standards,
Hmm.
Simplicius mentions this tweet that was going around. It compares Trump wanting to, acquire new territory to China and Russia just trying to protect their interests.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. It's
Yeah.
it's pretty ironic, isn't it?
Definitely highlights how hypocritical things can be.
Exactly. Same actions, different players,
Mm-hmm.
totally different perception. It all comes down to who's got the power.
Right. That's a really good point. And then Simplicius gets into this feeling that people in the West, they don't even recognize their own countries anymore.
He talks about that a lot.
He lists all these problems: inflation, migration, economic struggles, the social divisions, even what he calls biomedical terror.
Yeah, it's like he's painting this picture of, like, disillusionment. People are unhappy.
Definitely. Like they've lost faith in their own countries. And it's interesting because he contrasts this with people looking east, towards the east, with this sense of wonder. He even calls it the great TikTok refugee crisis of 2025.
That's a kitschy phrase, isn't it?
It is, but it makes you think, is there something to this? Is this exposure to other cultures through TikTok or whatever, is it making people question the West?
It's a good question. Are people just curious? Or are they, like, searching for something different? Maybe a different way of doing things, governing, structuring society.
Then he throws in this really vivid image, George Soros receiving an award, a big prestigious award. But Simplicius says he looked, and I quote, like a third-rate pornographer.
Wow, okay.
And Simplicius, he seems to think it's symbolic of the West's decline,
That's heavy. I mean, the image, his interpretation, it says a lot. This unease, the world changing, everything shifting. And it definitely plays into that whole idea of Western decline, the uncertainty.
Yeah. And then to really hit that point home, he quotes Ezra Klein from a New York Times article. It's a powerful quote. Donald Trump is returning, artificial intelligence is maturing, the planet is warming, and the global fertility rate is collapsing.
Wow, that's a lot all at once.
Right. And Klein goes on to say that all these things, they represent the unsteady, unpredictable emergence of a different world.
Klein hits a nail on the head. Things are
Oh.
changing, and fast. AI, climate change, the population. It's a lot, and it's hard to know what's going to happen.
Exactly. And then Simplicius points out these connections between some pretty different people, the AfD in Germany, Elon Musk, and of course, Trump.
He's saying it's all connected.
Yeah, like they're all part of this growing right-wing movement that's gaining momentum all over the world.
That's interesting. Why is that happening now in so many different places? Is it pushback against globalization or the economy? Maybe people just want, like, stronger national identities.
Or all of the above, right?
Probably. And you can't forget about social media. It amplifies everything, creates these echo chambers.
Totally. And Simplicius seems to think these movements, they're tapping into something deep. A need for change. People are unhappy.
And they're looking for answers.
Exactly. And then he throws in his final point. He says the war in Ukraine, it's going to be a defining moment
A defining moment.
for the whole world order. And he thinks Trump could play a key role in it.
That's a big claim. What does he think is going to happen?
Well, he doesn't say exactly, but he definitely thinks the Ukraine war is going to, reshape everything.
Yeah.
And that Trump could be the one to tip the scales one way or the other.
Wow. It's like everything's hanging in the balance.
It is.
The future is so uncertain.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground already, but I think it's clear that Simplicius has given us a lot to think about.
No doubt. And we're just getting started. You know, one thing that really stuck with me from Simplicius's post is that idea of the West declining. But at the same time, other places, other powers are rising.
Yeah, it's like a seesaw, almost. One side goes up, the other goes down.
Exactly. And he really focuses on China. It's like he's saying that some people in the West, they're almost starting to doubt their own systems.
Like they're looking east and seeing something new, something better, maybe.
Yeah. And he uses that phrase, the great TikTok refugee crisis of 2025.
It's a powerful image. All these people fleeing the West, escaping to TikTok or something.
I mean, do you think there's any truth to that? Could something like TikTok really make people question everything they know, their values, their institutions?
I think it's possible. I mean, Simplicius definitely seems to believe that a lot of the shift away from the West, it's coming from this feeling of disillusionment.
Yeah, he keeps saying people feel like they no longer recognize their own country.
Exactly. And he lists all those problems: inflation, mass migration, the economy's struggling, plus all the social divisions, the biomedical terror. It's a lot.
It is. It's like he's saying all these problems They're not just random things happening. They're symptoms of something bigger.
Like the West has lost its way.
Yeah, something like that. And then, he contrasts that with China. They seem so confident, so sure of themselves.
Right. And remember that Marco Rubio quote? He was pretty clear about what he thinks is going to happen. China ruling the globe in 10 years.
Well, politicians always like to make dramatic statements.
Yeah, but I think there's some truth to it. China's influence is growing.
Oh, absolutely. But it's not just Simplicius who's noticed this. He even mentions an article from The Economist talking about, like, the end of an era, the end of, like, a century of U.S. foreign policy.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Right. And they say the world order is becoming more unruly and unpredictable.
I mean, that's kind of scary, isn't it? Not knowing what's going to happen next.
Yeah, there's definitely this feeling of, like, we're in uncharted territory. And Simplicius, he really captures that feeling in his writing. Like, we're at a crossroads, and there are all these different forces pushing and pulling. It's almost overwhelming.
And he seems to think that Trump's second inauguration, it was like a catalyst for all this change.
It's funny, isn't it? He's saying that Trump is both a product of these changes, but also a driving force behind them.
Yeah, like he's a symptom and a cause at the same time.
Exactly. And he's a disruptor, that's for sure.
Yeah.
He embodies all these anxieties, all these hopes and fears about the future.
And Simplicius doesn't hold back. He says that what Trump does with the Ukraine war, it could determine whether the U.S. stays a major power or gets swept away by history.
Those are some pretty high stakes.
They are. But it shows how serious this all is. Simplicius thinks the decisions being made right now, they're going to shape the world for decades to come.
He's saying we're at a tipping point.
Exactly. And then he brings up these right-wing movements that are popping up all over, like Elon Musk, the AfD in Germany.
It's interesting that he lumps them all together. What do you think he's getting at?
I think he's saying that this is a global phenomenon, this shift to the right.
And why is that happening now? I mean, is it a reaction to, like, globalization or the economy? Or maybe it's about national identity, like wanting a stronger sense of belonging.
It could be all of those things, right?
Probably. Plus, social media. It creates these echo chambers where these ideas can just fester and grow.
And Simplicius seems to think these movements, they're feeding off all the uncertainty, all the instability.
Right. People are looking for answers, for someone to blame.
And these movements, they offer simple solutions.
Even if those solutions aren't, realistic.
Exactly. But Simplicius's main point, I think, is that we're entering a new era, one that's full of uncertainty, volatility, and potentially a whole new balance of power.
It's a little scary, but also kind of exciting, right?
Yeah, I think so too. It's like we're on the verge of something big. We just don't know what it is yet.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. We're all just trying to figure it out as we go along.
Going through all this with Simplicius, I'm kind of left with this feeling of like more questions than answers.
Yeah, it's true.
Right.
Maybe that's the point, though, like he's not giving us a roadmap.
No, definitely not.
It's more like he's throwing out these big ideas, getting us to really think about this moment in history, how complicated it is, how unpredictable. It's almost like a challenge.
A challenge.
Yeah. Like, hey, wake up. Things are changing. Whether you like it or not, you're going to just sit there and watch?
Yeah.
Or are you going to, try to do something about it?
I like that. Be a part of the change.
Exactly. And one of the big things he talks about is this feeling of, like, a paradigm shift. Like the old ways of doing things, the old systems, they're not working anymore.
Yeah. And he quotes Ezra Klein, who says something like, everything we took for granted, the climate, birth rates, political institutions, it's all breaking down.
It's pretty unsettling thought, like the ground is shifting under our feet.
And that feeling of things breaking down, Simplicius sees it in the West. He talks about inflation, the migration crisis, the economy tanking.
And the social divisions.
Right. It's like everything's unraveling.
And then he contrasts that with China.
Yeah.
Which he seems to think is, well, a real threat to the way things are.
Yeah. He's basically asking, what if the West loses its grip? What happens then? What happens if China takes over?
Those are some big questions. And it's important to remember Simplicius is just one guy, one perspective.
Right, of course.
But his analysis is valuable because it forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about the future, about the world that we live in.
Yeah, he definitely makes you think. And he challenges us to really think about the information we're taking in, from the media, from politicians, from social media.
Oh, yeah, like those Time magazine covers we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
He uses those to show how powerful images can be, how they can shape our perception.
And he talks about language, too. The way words can be used to frame things, to manipulate how we think, like the way Rubio talks about China, or Bannon talking about a deep state.
Right. Words can be weapons, basically.
Exactly.
So it's more important than ever to be able to think for yourself. Be critical. Don't just believe everything you hear.
Question everything.
Exactly. Ask, who's saying this? What's their agenda? Do they have any evidence?
So, big question. After all this, after this whole deep dive, what do you think people should take away from Simplicius? What's the main message?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is this. Things are changing, big time, and we need to pay attention.
Right. Like we can't just bury our heads in the sand.
No, this is a time to be informed, to be thoughtful, and to be active. We need to be engaged, participate in shaping the world we want to live in.
Make a difference.
Exactly. We can't just be passive bystanders. We have to make choices in our own lives, in our communities, politically. We have responsibility to ourselves, to the future.
It's a powerful message. And Simplicius, he's given us a lot to think about.
He has. He's challenged our assumptions, made us think differently.
And he's left us with this feeling of, like, urgency, but also possibility.
Yeah, the future is uncertain. But that doesn't mean we're powerless.
Like we're all standing at the edge of something new.
And it's up to us to decide what that new world will look like.
The choices we make now will determine the course of our future.
And who knows what the future holds. It's going to be an interesting ride, that's for sure.
On that note, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us, everyone.